Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm your host, LaTonya Wilkins, executive coach and award-winning author of the book, Leading Below the Surface. So today we're going to be talking about attachment styles. And it's funny because I know we're talking about this topic, and some of you might think, what does this have to do with leadership, leading below the surface? So let me tell you who this episode is for and why this topic is important. So first off, if you are someone who job hops and you're wondering why, this might be for you, right? If you're wondering why you might job hop, like what that might have to do with your attachment style, this might be for you. If you are someone that struggles with relationships at work, this might be for you. If you are someone who trusts too easily at work, this might be for you. We're going to get into attachment styles, what they are, and then we're going to move into how they show up in love, and then how they show up in leadership and teams. We're going to end with, what do you do about all this? Because we're going to talk about it. So now what do we do about all this information around attachment styles? So first off, let's talk about what attachment styles are and why did I want to do an episode on this? Well, as many of you know, I've had a few life changes lately. If you're on YouTube, you could see that I'm in a new studio. I actually moved. There was a 12-year relationship I was in that ended. So that is a big, big change. And so I'd been reflecting a lot on that relationship, on all my relationships in life. I've been reconnecting with myself, with my body, and just trying to understand everything that happened. One of the frameworks that has helped me make sense of all this stuff are attachment styles. So I read the book Attached, and I've also just been kind of dabbling in this stuff for some time. And so if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a little bit familiar with the attachment styles. I don't claim to be an expert, but what I want to do is give you all a quick framework so you can use this at work and leadership and in leadership in life. So first off, let's get into the attachment styles, what they are, and a little bit about them. Okay, so let's do that first. And then we're going to get into a quick diagnosis of each. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychologist. But again, I think this is really good information. It's a really good framework. So let's start with I'm going to talk about 4 attachment styles, even though there's kind of debate on this last one and the name of it, but I'm going to go through the 4 that are foundational. I think they seem to be consistent across all the research. So number 1 is anxious. So number 2 is avoidant. Number 3 is disorganized. And number 4 is secure. Okay. The third one has a lot of different names, but I'm going to call it disorganized because that's kind of where I learned. And that's the word that I learned when I first started studying this stuff. So there's also fearful, avoidant. There's other definitions of that one. So let's start with anxious. So anxious attachment styles. What are they? What do they look like? Well, anxious attachment styles, as we know from the name, these are people that if you are in a relationship and you are anxious, you're probably someone that gets nervous that someone's going to leave. You might feel abandoned, or you might fear abandonment. You might want to be close to someone all the time because you are, again, afraid that something's going to happen with the relationship or that something's going to happen with you too. Okay. So one of the things about attachment styles I didn't mention, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I'll loosely tell you what they're based on, but they're based on the idea that, when we were children, how much care did our parents give? How much care did our parents give us? They hold us. I've done a lot of work myself. So I think I was anxious. Now I'm pretty secure. So it just depends on, not just your childhood and your early years. It's also what you do in wellness, mental health, all that stuff. I didn't like being anxious. I didn't like being an anxious attachment style. And so I figured out some things that worked for me. And I'm happy to get into that later. So anxious attachment style, relationships, you're probably familiar. This is talked about a lot. You crave closeness. You fear abandonment. You might misread signals. The second one is avoidant. So avoidant attachment, this is the only one you've heard of because this one is kind of like the Achilles heel of relationships. Like when I talk to people and if they're in a challenging relationship, they always bring up that the person's avoidant. Avoidance, very similar to relationships. They might feel like someone's invading their space. They like to be independent. They don't like micromanagement. They might be viewed as aloof. So you might be avoidant at work if you don't ever want to go to work, functions, right? That might be a sign that you're avoidant at work. And then disorganized is a combination of both, right? These are people that they want to be connected, but they think they're going to be hurt, push, pull. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about which one you are. So everyone take a minute, take out a piece of paper. Which of these really do you relate to? And I'm going to give you a couple questions that you can use to kind of mini diagnose yourself. But first off, do you feel safe in close relationships? Even during conflict, do you express your needs without guilt? At work, do you overcheck? Or do you trust your team? Okay? So if you're answering yes to those, then you're probably lean on the secure side. Okay, anxious. Do you worry when people are upset with you? And this could be a lack of psychological safety, which I understand that too. But is this a pattern? Is this a tendency? Do you think you're too much or too emotional? Do you ruminate? We talked about that earlier. So if you do these things, you probably lean anxious. Avoidant. You feel uncomfortable with closeness when people are getting close. And you might say something like, LaTonya, I'm just a private person. Okay, well, think about yourself at home versus work. Are you still doing this at home, right? Do you keep emotional distance to protect yourself from being hurt? What does that look like? Do you try to maintain control and downplay everything else? So again, disorganized is a mix of all of these. Do you just trust leadership or team dynamics, even though it's supportive, it's going well, you still doubt it? Do you swing between intense emotions, withdrawal, push pull? Do you thrive on that? Do you like push pull relationships? Is that something that you're accustomed to? And then we're going to end with some coaching tips around each of these styles. Okay, so before we get into the coaching tips, I just think this is fun. This was a study that was done, I believe, in the early 1990s. And there's others that have been done since then. But there's never really been a measurement on the data of how many people in the U.S. kind of fall into each group. This, again, folks, this is not scientific. But I guess secure, when you look at the studies across the board, it's about 50 to 60% of people. Anxious is about 20 to 25% of people. And avoidance about 20 to 25. And then disorganized is just a smaller percentage. So that's interesting, right? Only 50% of people are secure. Huh. Wow. That's not a big number. Okay. The other thing I wanted to share is to move from anxious to secure is more likely than to move from avoidant to secure. Why? Well, because avoidance, they kind of hide everything. So you don't really know. There's not a lot of self-awareness around that they're being avoidant or they're exhibiting avoidant behaviors. But with anxious, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to get in touch with, and other people can give you that feedback. So that was a lot. Okay, so now let's get into our final stretch here. So what does this all mean? Why do I care? Well, I found that especially in today's times, if we have little frameworks to help us through the day. Like I know some people are clients that use DISC or they use strengths or they use Enneagram. Okay. Those are kind of like leadership type assessments, right? Team site assessments, like work style assessments. But this is really like you. This is not how you relate to people. This is you. This is deep, right? And it's not strengths. It's not something that is an output. It's like you and your behavior. And there's just something that interests you. Go back to the podcast episode I did with Blythe Landry. We did it on how your trauma affects how you lead, because these things go hand in hand. So this type of awareness is so important, right? So let's talk a little bit about like, what do we do about this? How do we make sense of all this? What does this look like? What I'll say is let's start with anxious, okay? So if you are an anxious attachment style, that's fine. First of all, acknowledge it, right? Like acknowledge which one you are. Maybe you don't know. And again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not diagnosing you. But if you are anxious, just know what your tendencies are. Know that you are going to, you're going to ruminate on things. And that's going to take a lot of time, right? There's going to be a lot of things that are not real, that you're imagining. And it's not even the situation at hand that you're thinking about. It's something, it's probably something that happened like 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Like maybe like a really good example I can use that I see people do is that maybe they lose a job, right? Or they're pushed out of a company and they're still thinking about that like 10 years later, right? And that's causing that anxious attachment style. Sometimes they have that at home, sometimes they don't, but it's like, think about that. What's the trigger? Like ask yourself the question, what's really happening? What really happened? Also, do you feel comfortable expressing your fears? If you're not psychologically safe, you probably won't feel comfortable expressing those with your manager, but can you express those with a colleague or someone you trust? But understanding your fears, another really good tool that works for me is journaling. Just journal about those fears. And then if you come back to those, you'll realize, oh, this is not real. I joke with my clients sometimes and I'm like, the vast majority of what we react to is in the past, not present. Again, the vast majority of what we react to is in the past, not present. It has nothing to do with that person or that situation. It's something else that triggered that. And so keeping that in mind, okay? Avoidance. So again, if you're avoidant, it's going to be hard. Usually avoidance kind of wants, they want connection, but they just don't know how to do it, okay? So again, maybe like with you, it's ask yourself, like, why aren't you asking for help? Like, what would happen if you asked for help? Maybe have a couple of people that you can practice with, like intimacy with at work. And what does that look like? Well, maybe you have a couple people where you could try to have a relationship with and kind of go from there. Maybe force yourself to go to events or force yourself to participate. Just have have an agreement with yourself and just acknowledge this is who you are. And then just have some things that you're going to do. The other strategy that might work with avoidance is, especially if you like your job, just think about how this is affecting your colleagues. Think about how this is affecting you. Like you're basically putting a wall up between you and your colleagues. So think about that and maybe use that as motivation to kind of move forward. Disorganized, similar. I'm not going to get into that, but let's talk about secure. So if you're secure, are you taking on too much? Are you too trusting? Do you, jump in head first? Like these types of things. Again, I'm not saying those things are not good because those things are important because someone has to take a step forward in a relationship. But, secure attachment, like this is something we don't talk a lot about, but they tend to take on labor for others. And I do that. I'm a giver. And so I'm secure. And so I'm giving more and more. And I'm like, oh, this is fine. But you got to remember also to take care of yourself. Okay. All right. So I'm going to wrap up today's episode. So again, what did we talk about? Well, we talked about we've talked about 4 attachment styles. Again, I'm not a psychologist. We talked about these, like how do they affect you at work? A couple coaching tips on those. And go back to my episode with Blythe Landry. We talked about how trauma affects the way we lead. And I think, again, these topics are so important because in the workplace, a lot of the times we're focusing on the outward, but what about the inward and healing that inward? And so continue on your healing journey. If you like this episode, if it resonated with you, it probably will with some of your people. So definitely pass it on to your network. And that's all I have for today. Thank you, folks.